Hey there, welcome to Broderos. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe right away. If you end up not enjoying it, you can always take it back later. Get cozy and let the fear take over. The Legend of the Bear. The evening air in Yellowstone was cool and crisp, the kind of air that carries the scent of pine and earth, thick and rich with the smells of the wilderness. I stood at the edge of the trail, the vast expanse of the park stretching out before me. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, a perfect sight for anyone seeking peace. But for me, it wasn't enough. I craved something more. I craved solitude. This was my first trip to the park, and though I had heard stories, I wasn't here for the ghost tales or local legends. I was here to experience the wild in its purest form, untouched, unspoiled by the noise of modern life. People in the lodge had spoken of strange happenings in the woods, tales of a ghost bear that roamed the park after dark. A creature whose eyes burned bright red, glowing with an unnatural light. They told me it was a spirit, a guardian of the land, punishing those who dared to intrude. I smiled politely, nodded at the campfire stories, but I had heard enough myths to last a lifetime. The night held nothing to fear, nothing that couldn't be explained away. Still, as I pulled my jacket tighter around me and started down the trail, I couldn't shake the slight unease settling into my chest. It wasn't the stories that worried me, it was the growing silence around me. Even the usual rustle of leaves or chirping of birds had gone quiet, as if the forest was holding its breath. I shrugged it off. This was just nature, I told myself. It was quieting down for the evening, the wildlife retreating for the night. I was here for solitude, and that's exactly what I was going to find. The path before me was clear, winding through the thick pines, and I welcomed the silence that enveloped me as the light slowly faded. My footsteps were the only sound in the stillness, the crunch of gravel beneath my boots loud against the hush of the forest. This was what I wanted, peace, along with my thoughts. But as the shadows lengthened and the forest deepened, a strange feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. I couldn't quite place it, but it was as though the woods themselves were watching, waiting. Something felt off. I stopped for a moment and glanced around, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. No sign of anything unusual. Just the trees, the fading light, the quiet. I shook my head, dismissing the feeling. It was nothing. Just a trick of the mind. I had heard the stories, sure, but they were nothing more than folklore, right? I pushed forward, determined to find my peace in the quiet of the wilderness. As the last light of day slipped away, I noticed the air had grown colder, the kind of cold that sinks deep into your bones. Something about it felt wrong. But still, I continued, convinced I was just letting my imagination get the best of me. I had no idea how wrong I was. The night deepened around me as I walked further into the woods. The moon had risen now, a pale sliver in the sky, casting a soft, silver glow over everything. The forest, bathed in this ethereal light, looked like a scene out of a dream, majestic pines towering overhead, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. The underbrush, thick with ferns and moss, glistened faintly, the dew catching the moonlight like tiny stars scattered across the ground. It was a peaceful scene, serene and untouched, the kind of beauty that made you feel as though you had stepped into another world. The air was cool, but not unpleasant. It carried with it the rich scent of damp earth and the faintest trace of pine resin. It felt pure, like every breath I took was cleansing me, washing away the weight of everyday life. I could hear the occasional rustle of leaves as the wind swept through the trees, and the distant hoot of an owl broke the stillness. These sounds were comforting, part of the symphony of the night that had existed long before I had set foot here. But the longer I walked, the more I started to notice the subtle changes in the forest around me. The sounds that once seemed natural, soothing even, now began to take on an unfamiliar edge. The wind that had been soft and steady started to shift, moving in jagged bursts, as if responding to something unseen. The trees creaked under the pressure, the sound carrying through the stillness in an unsettling way. A sudden rustling from the underbrush caught my attention, sharp and quick. I stopped in my tracks, heart pounding for a split second before I realized it was just a small animal, likely a deer or a rabbit, scurrying through the leaves. I exhaled, annoyed at myself for jumping at shadows. But even as I resumed walking, the feeling of unease didn't quite fade. There was something about the quiet now, a thickness in the air, as though the forest was holding its breath. I couldn't help but feel the hairs on the back of my neck prickle, a sense that I was no longer alone. I glanced over my shoulder, but the trees stood still, their trunks lined up like silent sentinels in the moonlight. There was nothing there. Nothing at all. I pressed on, trying to shake the feeling, but the odd sensation of being watched lingered. The forest felt alive in a way that was hard to explain. It was as if every rustling leaf, every snap of a twig underfoot was amplified in the quiet. Every sound felt too deliberate, too close. The air had grown heavier, pressing on me as though it was thick with unseen eyes. I quickened my pace, but my eyes kept darting from shadow to shadow, scanning the darkness around me. There was nothing to see. No movement. No sign of anything out of place. But it was there, the feeling of being watched, of something waiting just out of sight. I couldn't shake it. The sounds of the forest had changed, become more distant, as though the very life of the woods had retreated from me, leaving only an oppressive silence. Even the hoot of the owl had stopped. There was no wind anymore, only stillness, and the soft crunch of my footsteps on the trail. I paused again, feeling the weight of the silence pressing down. The moonlight filtered through the branches above, casting strange shadows on the ground. The forest, which had once seemed peaceful, now felt alien, its beauty marred by an intangible sense of dread. I was being foolish. I was alone, and it was easy for my mind to play tricks on me. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching, waiting for me to make a mistake. I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder once more, just to be sure. But there was still nothing there. At least, that's what I told myself. I kept walking, trying to focus on the path ahead. The trees loomed taller now, their narrow branches twisting into strange shapes against the night sky. The air had become still again, almost unnaturally so. I could feel my breath coming a little faster, my chest tightening, but I pushed the feelings aside. Then, faintly at first, I heard it. A soft crunch of gravel beneath something heavy. It was subtle, but unmistakable, footsteps. I stopped immediately, my heart skipping a beat. The noise had come from behind me, further down the trail. I turned around, but the path was empty. The darkness beyond the trees was impenetrable, and there was nothing, no sign of movement. The forest seemed unchanged, quiet once more. I exhaled shakily, trying to calm my racing thoughts. It must have been an animal, I reasoned. A deer, maybe, or some other creature moving through the underbrush. It was just the wind playing tricks with my ears. There was no one out here, no one but me. I forced myself to take a few steps forward, trying to regain my composure, but the unease in my gut had only deepened. I quickened my pace, my footsteps louder now, echoing slightly in the quiet. But then it happened again, faint, but there. Crunch. Crunch. The unmistakable sound of footsteps behind me. My stomach turned. I whipped around again, heart pounding. The trail stretched out behind me, empty. The trees cast long, twisted shadows in the moonlight, but there was no one there. No movement. Nothing at all. I felt my hands start to tremble. This wasn't right. I had been hearing things. I had to be. There was no one here but me. Just me and the wilderness. But the feeling, that feeling, was growing. The sense that something was out there, just beyond my sight, watching me from the shadows. The air seemed thicker now, heavier, pressing in around me like a physical weight. I shook my head, trying to push the thoughts from my mind. I had to stay rational. The world didn't work like that. There were no ghosts, no spirits lurking in the woods. It was just me. It was just my mind, making up things in the dark. I started walking faster, almost breaking into a jog, eager to put more distance between myself and whatever was causing the growing unease. But no matter how quickly I moved, the sensation of being followed refused to leave. The footsteps, though faint, kept coming, just behind me, getting closer with each step I took. I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder once more. And that's when I heard it. A low growl. A sound so deep and guttural that it felt like it came from the very earth beneath my feet. It echoed through the trees, vibrating in my chest. I froze. I turned slowly, my breath catching in my throat, expecting to see something, anything, in the shadows. But there was nothing. The forest stood still, as it always had, and the growl, whatever it had been, was gone. Just the wind, I told myself again, but the words felt hollow now. My hands were clammy, my legs shaky. The silence around me had shifted into something far more unnerving, as if the very air was waiting for something to happen. Then, from somewhere far in the distance, came a sound that chilled me to my core. It wasn't a growl, nor a rustle in the leaves. It was a soft, almost imperceptible sound, like the cracking of branches, followed by the sound of heavy breathing. I froze once more, my heart racing. This time, I didn't turn around. I couldn't. Something was out there. Something that wasn't supposed to be. And now, it was getting closer. I kept moving, my pace now quicker than before, but the strange feeling of being watched was overwhelming. Every snap of a twig, every shift in the wind sent a jolt of fear through my chest. I couldn't keep my eyes from darting over my shoulder, scanning the dark edges of the trail, hoping, praying that I would see nothing. But the shadows seemed to stretch and bend in strange ways, like they were alive, twisting around the trees and moving in unnatural patterns. Then, between two tall pines, I saw it. A shadow. It was brief, just a flicker of movement, darker than the surrounding darkness, a shape that darted between the trees in the corner of my vision. My heart stopped for a moment, and I froze, staring at the spot where I'd seen it, trying to make sense of what I had just witnessed. It was too quick, too elusive. I couldn't make out any details, just the suggestion of a figure, a silhouette, too large to be a deer, too unnatural to be just a trick of the light. I took a cautious step forward, my breath catching in my throat. The forest was eerily still, and for a moment, I thought I might hear something, a rustle, a crack, anything to indicate I wasn't imagining it. but there was nothing. I shook my head and exhaled slowly, trying to push the panic down. It was just the trees, I told myself. The shifting shadows. A trick of the mind in the dim light of the moon. Nothing more. But my heart was hammering in my chest, and the silence had grown even more oppressive. The woods no longer felt like a sanctuary, but a labyrinth of dark, oppressive shadows. I couldn't tell where the trees ended and the darkness began. As I continued walking, I tried to rationalize it. I had to. There was no other explanation. I was alone in the wilderness, my mind playing tricks on me. The movement had been too quick, too fleeting to be anything real. There was no way something was out here with me. But that didn't explain the feeling that weighed on my chest. The gnawing, constant sensation that something was just out of sight, watching me from beyond the trees, waiting for me to slip up. I quickened my pace again, my footsteps growing louder in the stillness. But then, something strange happened. A cold gust of wind swept through the trees, and with it came a sudden, bone-chilling cold that seemed to come from nowhere. It wasn't the usual cool night air. This was different, sharp, like ice running through my veins. I shivered, pulling my jacket tighter around my shoulders, but it didn't help. The chill seemed to seep through the fabric, as if the cold was coming from within the very woods themselves. I looked around, eyes darting from tree to tree, but the cold didn't make sense. There was no storm, no sign of weather changing. Just this sudden, unnatural coldness. And then, as though to add to the disorienting atmosphere, a faint sound reached my ears. A low, guttural growl, barely audible, but unmistakable. It seemed to come from all around me, reverberating off the trees, too distant to be a bear or any other animal I knew. I stopped dead in my tracks, every muscle in my body tense, ready to react. The growl seemed to echo and stretch in the stillness, a low rumble that churned in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't an animal's warning call. It wasn't natural. And it felt wrong. I forced myself to move again, but my steps were hesitant now, slower, as if I was being pulled into some invisible trap. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being herded, that whatever was out there, whatever was making these noises, was closing in on me. The wind picked up again, this time not just cold, but carrying with it a strange, sharp scent. It wasn't the fresh, piney smell of the woods, nor the clean scent of earth. This was something different, something foul, metallic, like the sharp tang of iron in the air. I stumbled, nearly tripping over a root, but quickly regained my balance, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. I had to keep moving. I had to leave this place before whatever it was got closer. But deep down, I knew it was already too late. The forest was no longer just a place to hike. It was a hunter's domain, and I was the prey. The silence of the forest had become a thing of the past. The wind had died down, but the air felt even more oppressive, as though it were thick with something invisible, something waiting. I was moving now on instinct, my steps faster, my breath shallower. But no matter how quickly I moved, the feeling of being followed didn't fade. In fact, it was only growing stronger, intensifying with each passing moment. Then, it came. At first, it was just a faint rustling, a crackling of leaves and underbrush. I stopped dead in my tracks, listening intently. It was too loud now to be a simple animal. The sound came from deeper within the trees, on my left, just beyond the cover of the undergrowth. It wasn't the hurried movement of a deer or the soft scurrying of a smaller animal. It was something heavier, something much larger. My heart pounded in my chest. The rustling continued, louder now, each crack of branches and shuffle of leaves more distinct. And then, the growl. Low, deep, and guttural, the sound rumbled through the air like a distant thunderstorm, vibrating the ground beneath my feet. It was the sound of a creature far too large and far too powerful to be any animal I'd ever encountered. The growl carried a raw menace, an unmistakable warning, and my breath caught in my throat. My body froze. Every instinct told me to run, but my legs refused to move, my feet rooted to the spot, as if something invisible, was holding me in place. The growl grew louder, closer now, vibrating through the air. But still, I couldn't see it. It was out there. I could feel it, sense it, it was close. But the trees and shadows swallowed whatever it was, hiding it just out of sight. My pulse raced. I wanted to turn around, to look for an escape, but my feet wouldn't obey. I strained my eyes in the direction of the sound, trying desperately to make out any shape, any movement, but there was nothing. Only the darkness, thick and impenetrable, the shadows of trees twisting in strange, unnatural shapes. Another growl, closer this time. I could hear the rustling of leaves again, the heavy, deliberate steps of something large moving through the underbrush. It wasn't trying to hide anymore. It was coming for me. I wanted to scream, but the fear in my chest had stolen my voice. I felt it looking at me from the dark, its presence so overwhelming that it seemed to suffocate the very air. Every hair on my body stood on end, and the sweat on my palms made my grip on my backpack tighter. The growl wasn't just a sound now. It was a promise. A warning. I couldn't make out what was out there, but my mind was racing with possibilities. A bear? No, this was different, too deep, too unnatural. A wolf? Even the largest pack of wolves wouldn't make a sound like that. I forced myself to take a step backward, my body trembling, but my feet felt like they were moving through thick mud, reluctant to leave the spot I stood in. The rustling stopped suddenly, and the silence that followed was more terrifying than the growl itself. I strained to hear, to catch any sound, any clue about where it was, but all I could hear was my own heartbeat thumping in my ears. And then I heard it again, the sound of something massive moving, shifting through the undergrowth. But this time, it wasn't a rustle. This time, it was the unmistakable sound of something large stepping heavily through the forest, branches snapping beneath its weight. I couldn't see it, but I knew it was close. Closer than I had ever imagined. In that moment, I realized something that chilled me to my core. This wasn't just an animal. It was something else. Something that didn't belong here. Something that had been waiting. The legend. The growl came again, closer still, and I knew, in that instant, that whatever it wasn't going to stay hidden much longer. It was hunting. And I was its prey. I didn't know how long I'd been walking. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours, and yet every step I took only seemed to drag me deeper into the darkness. The path ahead was barely visible now, the trees pressing in on either side, their twisted branches reaching like long fingers trying to grab at me. The night was silent, but the silence was suffocating, thick with tension, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. The rustling behind me, that rustling, hadn't stopped. It followed me now, growing louder with each hesitant step. At first, it had been distant, almost imperceptible, but now it was a constant presence, like a shadow creeping just behind my own. The sound of something large moving through the brush, dragging its weight over the earth, barely muffled by the undergrowth. My stomach churned with dread, but I forced myself to keep walking, my legs moving on their own, driven by some primal instinct to escape. I couldn't look behind me again. I had already made that mistake once. If I looked again, I knew I'd lose whatever little control I had left. I focused on the path in front of me, my heart hammering in my chest. Each step seemed to echo too loudly in the quiet of the forest, amplifying my fear. The ground beneath me was uneven, roots and rocks jutting out from the earth, threatening to trip me up with every move. But the worst part wasn't the fear of falling or losing my footing, it was the feeling of being watched. The feeling that something unseen was just waiting for me to make the wrong move, ready to pounce when I least expected it. The rustling was getting closer. I could hear it now, each step of whatever it was, just behind me, stalking me through the trees. The growl from earlier echoed in my mind, a warning, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just a bear or anything I had encountered in the wild before. This wasn't right. The air around me shifted suddenly, and the temperature dropped. It wasn't gradual, it was a sharp, sudden drop, as if the warmth of the night had been stolen in an instant. I shivered uncontrollably, my breath turning into mist before my eyes. The chill seeped into my bones, deeper than any cold I had ever felt in the wilderness. I pulled my jacket tighter, but it didn't help. The cold was different, unnatural, almost as if the forest itself was exhaling something dark and heavy. The hairs on my neck stood on end, my skin prickling with the sensation that something was standing too close to me, just out of view. A low sound, almost like a whisper, brushed past my ears, and I froze, my breath caught in my throat. My mind raced, trying to rationalize it, but the thought was too terrible to entertain. The sound was too soft to be a breeze. Too deliberate. The whisper was like a presence, a warning, or perhaps a call. The rustling, the growl, the whisper, it was getting closer. It was all coming from behind me, drawing nearer, as though whatever it was had learned to mimic the sounds of the forest, weaving itself into the night. I couldn't shake the growing realization, it wasn't just watching me anymore. It was hunting me. With every step I took, the air grew heavier. The shadows of the trees seemed to stretch longer, more distorted, like dark fingers reaching to touch me. The night that had once been peaceful and serene now felt like a labyrinth of fear, each shadow hiding something I wasn't meant to see. I quickened my pace, my mind screaming at me to run. But no matter how fast I moved, no matter how far I tried to put between myself and that haunting presence, it stayed with me. The rustling behind me didn't stop. The cold didn't fade. The whispering didn't vanish. It was getting closer, and I couldn't outrun it. The air around me was thick, every breath I took felt strained, heavy with the weight of the darkness pressing in. My heart hammered in my chest, louder than the crunch of twigs beneath my boots, louder than the whispering wind in the trees. But something was different now, something more suffocating than the chill or the rustling. It was the sound of breathing. At first, it was so soft, so faint, that I thought I might be imagining it. Maybe the wind was playing tricks on me, maybe my nerves were getting the best of me. But then I heard it again. A slow, deliberate breath, in, out, steady, and deep. It wasn't mine. The sound was coming from nearby, too close to ignore, too steady to be the wind or a distant animal. It was like someone, or something, was standing just behind me, breathing with a calmness that made my blood run cold. My skin prickled, a wave of nausea rising in my throat, and I froze, straining my ears to hear more. The silence that followed was thick, almost oppressive, but the breathing didn't stop. It remained, a rhythmic, haunting presence in the dark. I tried to rationalize it, to dismiss it. It could be an animal, some large predator like a wolf, or maybe even a bear. But it didn't make sense. There was no rustling, no movement of leaves or underbrush that usually followed an animal's presence. It was just the sound of steady, controlled breathing, as though whatever was out there was deliberately watching, waiting for me to react. I glanced over my shoulder, my body stiff with fear, but there was nothing. Nothing but the swirling shadows of the trees stretching unnaturally in the dim light. The path behind me was empty, just the same endless stretch of forest. But I knew it wasn't empty. I could feel it. I could sense it. The air grew even colder, and I could see my breath hanging in front of me in the faint moonlight, the mist swirling like ghosts in the night. My legs moved on their own, my steps becoming erratic, faster now, desperate to put distance between myself and whatever was stalking me. But the breathing followed, relentless, closer than before. Panic began to claw at my chest. My thoughts scrambled, tumbling over each other, desperate to find some rational explanation to make sense of what was happening. Was it a hallucination? Had I been out here too long in the isolation of the woods with the shadows closing on me? No. It was real. I knew it. Every instinct in my body screamed that it was real. I quickened my pace again, my feet slipping over roots, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. The cold air seemed to wrap itself around my lungs, making every inhale feel heavier than the last. But still, that breathing, slow and deliberate, persisted, as though it was a part of the very night itself, clinging to me, refusing to let go. I glanced around once more, my eyes frantically searching the darkness. I couldn't see anything. Not a shape. Not a shadow that could be a bear or a person. But the breathing was there, so close, so real, that I could almost feel it on the back of my neck, like a whisper of warm air just brushing my skin. It was inescapable. It wasn't behind me anymore. It was beside me. I stopped again, my heart racing, my breath a ragged gasp. I wanted to turn, to look, to see what was out there, but something stopped me. My body tensed, every muscle screaming for me to stay still, to not make a sound. If I looked, if I made any movement, I knew I would see something I wasn't supposed to. The air felt thick now, heavier with each breath I took. The woods around me were no longer silent. They were waiting, listening, as though the whole forest itself had come alive to witness whatever was happening to me. The rustling had stopped, replaced entirely by the breathing, slow, steady, and unmistakably close. I couldn't outrun it. I couldn't hide from it. And worst of all, I couldn't explain it away. The forest had gone silent once again, but I could feel it, the eyes, somewhere in the darkness, locked on me, watching my every move. I didn't know how much more of this I could take. Every breath felt like a struggle, as if the very air was thickening with dread, suffocating me with its weight. The breathing was still there, lurking just beyond the edge of my awareness, its steady rhythm beating against my skull. And yet, somehow, the forest had grown quieter, too quiet, its unsettling stillness pressing in on me like the silence before a storm. But then, something shifted. At first, I thought it was just another trick of the shadows, my eyes playing games with me in the dark. A flicker, a glimmer, just beyond the trees. But when I blinked, it was still there. And when I looked closer, my heart stopped, frozen in my chest. There, between the black trunks of the trees, two glowing red orbs were staring at me. I froze. The eyes didn't blink. They didn't shift. They simply stared, two points of unblinking crimson light cutting through the darkness like twin coals. At first, I thought I must be imagining it. After all, in the wilderness, creatures like wolves or bears sometimes have eyes that gleam in the dark. But these weren't the soft reflection of animal eyes. These eyes had a malevolence to them. A cold, calculating presence that sent chills through my spine. I stared at them, unable to look away. The eyes didn't move, they simply watched, unblinking, unmoving, as though they were waiting for something. My breath caught in my throat as I tried to convince myself that I was mistaken. That it was a trick of the light. That it could be anything, some animal far away, or a flash of something natural. But deep down, I knew the truth. I knew what I was seeing wasn't natural. These eyes were too bright, too intense, too wrong. I took a step back, my feet stumbling over the uneven ground, and the moment I moved, the eyes didn't follow, they didn't need to. They were already locked on me, as though they had always been there, watching from the moment I stepped into this cursed forest. The rustling had stopped. The breathing had ceased. There was only the stillness of those eyes, and the growing realization that I was not alone. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. The stories I had heard, ridiculous tales whispered by local guides, by hikers who had come and gone, came rushing back to me. The ghostly bear that roamed the woods of Yellowstone. The one that appeared only at night, with glowing red eyes, protecting its territory with a terrifying force. The one that drove anyone who ventured too close into madness, or worse, disappeared without a trace. I had laughed them off as nothing more than stories meant to thrill tourists, to make the wilderness seem more dangerous than it was. But now, standing alone in the dark with those eyes fixed on me, I couldn't ignore the truth any longer. The stories, they might be real. The realization settled in like a weight in my chest, heavy and unyielding. The stories weren't just stories. They were warnings. Warnings about something that wasn't a bear. Not a wolf. Not anything natural. This was something else, something ancient, something bound to these woods, a presence that had lived here long before any of us had set foot in this park. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the red glow, even as a wave of terror threatened to swallow me whole. The longer I stared at those eyes, the more I felt myself being pulled in, as if they were drawing me closer, beckoning me to step deeper into the darkness where I would surely lose myself. I couldn't look away, but I couldn't move closer either. It was as though the forest itself had wrapped its roots around my legs, holding me in place. And those eyes, those red eyes, were waiting. I wanted to run. I wanted to turn and sprint back to the safety of the trailhead to escape this nightmare. But my body refused to obey. The weight of the eyes held me captive, frozen in place, unable to break free. I could hear the beating of my own heart, thudding in my chest, pounding in my ears, louder than anything else in the stillness of the night. I was trapped in the stare of something that wasn't human, that wasn't animal, and yet it was so terrifyingly alive. A breath, soft, sharp, escaped my lips, and I could feel the tension build. The eyes didn't move, and the fear, undeniable and suffocating, began to consume me. I was no longer in control. The forest had me. The eyes had me. And something told me I would never escape. Panic surged through me as I tried to tear my gaze away from those glowing red eyes. My instinct screamed at me to move, to run, to get as far away from whatever this thing was. But my legs felt like stone, my body frozen in place, as though the forest itself had wrapped its twisted roots around me, holding me captive in its unrelenting grip. I managed to take one unsteady step back, and then another, stumbling as I tried to retreat from the eyes that were still locked on me, unwavering in their intensity. The breath in my throat caught, panic threatening to choke me as I finally turned away, my heart pounding against my ribs. I couldn't stop now. I had to keep moving. I had to get away. But as I took another step, I heard it. The footsteps. Slow at first, almost imperceptible, like the rustle of leaves or the wind brushing through the trees. But as I took another step, they grew louder. Closer. A slow, deliberate thump against the ground. The sound of something massive, something heavy, pushing through the underbrush, mirroring my every movement. I glanced over my shoulder, but the eyes were still there, hovering just beyond the trees. They hadn't moved, but the sound, the footsteps were now unmistakable. A low, dragging step, followed by another, each one growing louder as if the creature was drawing nearer. The shadows seemed to stretch with every beat, like the forest itself was closing in around me, tightening its hold with every passing second. I couldn't stop. I had to keep moving. But the footsteps, they were following me. Each time I stepped forward, they matched my pace, growing closer with every stride. My breath came in ragged gasps, the panic building in my chest, my legs pushing faster despite the overwhelming fear that twisted my insides. I tried to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. After all, there were animals out here. Bears. Wolves. Creatures that moved with a quiet grace through the woods. But this wasn't the same. The sounds didn't match any animal I knew. They were too calculated. Too deliberate. I broke into a run, the terror in my chest now pushing me forward, my legs carrying me faster than I ever run before. But no matter how fast I went, no matter how far I put between myself and the eyes, the footsteps continued. They grew louder, closer, right behind me, echoing off the trees, filling the silence with a steady, rhythmic thud. I could feel the ground beneath my feet tremble, as though the very earth was shaking with each step it took. The forest no longer felt like a place of natural beauty. It was a trap, a maze of dark corners and endless shadows closing in on me. The footsteps were relentless, matching every stride I took, growing louder, more ominous with each passing second. The air around me was thick, and each breath burned in my chest, the cold biting at my skin, gnawing at my sanity. I glanced over my shoulder once more, but all I could see was the endless stretch of trees and shadows, nothing but the oppressive blackness of the forest. And still, those footsteps, those heavy, dragging steps, were there, following me like a ghost, relentless, unwilling to let me escape. My pulse raced, fear tightening its grip on my heart. I couldn't outrun it. I couldn't escape. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Whatever it was right behind me. It was never going to let me go. I ran faster, my body screaming in protest as I pushed myself harder, faster, but the sound of footsteps grew louder. I felt it then, the air around me pressing in, suffocating me, as if the entire forest was now hunting me. I wanted to scream, to call for help, but my voice caught in my throat. I was alone in the dark, running from something I didn't understand, something that was closing in, step by step, breath by breath. And then, just as I thought I might collapse from the sheer weight of the fear crashing through me, I heard it. A low growl, deep and guttural, vibrating through the very ground beneath my feet. It wasn't just behind me anymore. It was beside me, creeping closer with every breath I took. I was no longer just running from the unknown. I was running from something alive, something that could see me, that could follow me, and that had no intention of letting me leave. I didn't know how much longer I could keep running. My breath came in ragged bursts, my lungs burning with the cold air, but still, I pushed on, desperate to escape the relentless sound of footsteps behind me. Each step felt like it was dragging me further into a nightmare. The woods around me, which had once felt so vast and beautiful, now seemed like a labyrinth, the shadows closing out every side, trapping me in a never-ending maze of fear. Then, through the trees, I saw it, the clearing. It appeared like a dream, a moment of salvation in the darkness. The open space stretched out before me, bathed in the pale light of the moon, a brief respite from the claustrophobic woods. I could see the sky above me now, the stars faint but visible through the gaps in the canopy. For a moment, I thought I could stop, catch my breath, and gather my thoughts. But I couldn't. As soon as I stepped into the clearing, the cold, familiar presence was still there. The glowing red eyes, unchanged, unmoving, were just as I had seen them before, waiting. They hadn't gotten closer. They hadn't moved at all. They remained stationary, standing at the edge of the trees, watching me from a distance, like a predator observing its prey. A wave of exhaustion hit me, and I stopped in the middle of the clearing, my chest heaving as I tried to catch my breath. My legs felt like rubber beneath me, but I couldn't allow myself to stop moving. I had to keep going, had to find a way out of this nightmare. But how? I stared at the eyes, my mind desperately trying to piece together some explanation, something that made sense. It had to be an animal. It had to be. Bears had glowing eyes at night, right? Or maybe wolves. Maybe I had just been out here too long, too deep in my own head, listening to the whispers of the woods. But then again, why hadn't it attacked? Why didn't it chase me? Why hadn't I heard anything moving or felt the brush of fur against the trees? The longer I stood there, staring at the eyes, the more the weight of my panic crushed me. My heart raced, my mind spun in circles, and all I could hear was the steady, erratic pounding of my own pulse in my ears. There was something wrong here. I knew it. I could feel it in my bones. I tried to make sense of it all, to find a rational explanation that would calm my nerves, but nothing fit. The stories, the warnings, they were real. This wasn't a bear. This wasn't a trick of the light or my imagination. There was something out there, something ancient, something that had existed long before I stepped into this forest, and now it was watching me. Waiting. The sense of isolation was overwhelming. In the clearing, I could hear my own breathing, but there was no sound of the wind, no rustling leaves, no distant calls of animals. The world had gone quiet, holding its breath along with me. And there, just beyond the trees, those red eyes remained fixed on me, as unblinking as before. I couldn't run anymore. My legs were too tired, my body too broken from the fear that gripped me. I was out of options. And worst of all, I was utterly alone. The panic clawed at my chest, my thoughts scattered and desperate. What had I done to deserve this? Why was this happening? Why me? The deeper I thought, the clearer it became. This wasn't something I could outrun. This wasn't a creature I could fight. The isolation was consuming me, the realization that I had stepped into something far beyond my understanding. Something that had no place in this world. In the clearing, I felt smaller than I ever had before, surrounded by nothing but the oppressive night. The forest had swallowed me whole, and now I stood at its mercy. There was no way out, no escape, and the eyes never left me. I wasn't just lost in the woods. I was lost to the woods. And it was only a matter of time before I became part of its legend. I didn't know how much time had passed since I had stepped into that clearing. Minutes? Hours? It felt like the night itself had stretched into an eternity, each second heavier than the last. My heart was still racing, the fear gripping me like a vice, and yet I couldn't stop. My body was moving on autopilot, my legs carrying me forward, but my mind was screaming at me to stop, to think, to breathe. I had to get back to the campsite. I had to find my way out of this nightmare before it was too late. The path was there, somewhere. I had to trust it. I had to trust myself. But every step I took, I felt it again, the steps behind me. They were there, just beyond my reach, echoing in the stillness of the night. They were slow at first, like a creeping shadow in the forest. But now, they were growing louder, closer. Each footfall mirrored my own, as if something, or someone, was following me, staying just a few paces behind. I couldn't bring myself to turn around and look. I couldn't risk seeing those eyes again. But every fiber of my being screamed at me to look, to see what was out there. But I already knew. I already felt it deep in my gut. Whatever it wasn't going to let me go. My breath came in shallow gasps, and the air felt thick, almost suffocating. My mind was clouded with fear, each thought spiraling out of control. I couldn't think straight. I needed to get to the campsite. But where was it? I didn't know which way I had come from. The forest had twisted around me, its dark corners all blending together in an unrecognizable maze. Everything looked the same in the darkness: trees, shadows, the occasional broken branch on the ground. My sense of direction was completely gone. I broke into a run. There was no clear path, no sign to guide me. I ran blindly, not knowing which way I was going. My feet slipped against the wet, uneven ground as I pushed through the underbrush, my breath ragged, my heart hammering in my chest. The footsteps behind me grew louder, closer. They were no longer a distant echo, but a heavy, unmistakable rhythm. The sound of something that knew me. That was me. Every step I took, they followed, keeping pace with me as if there was no escape. My skin prickled with dread, and my legs moved faster, a panicked sprint that I couldn't control. I didn't care anymore. I didn't care where I was going. I just needed to run. I needed to get away. The darkness pressed in on me, the trees bending and shifting as though they were closing in, tightening their grip on me with every passing second. My mind screamed for clarity, for a sense of direction, but it was all a blur. My surroundings were twisting, warping in the dark, and the only thing I could hear was the pounding of my feet and those damn footsteps, always right behind me. I didn't know what was hunting me. I didn't know what it wanted. But I knew it was getting closer. No. I can't stop. I pushed harder, faster, through the brush, over fallen logs, not caring about the bruises forming on my arms, the branches scraping my skin. The pain was nothing compared to the fear that gripped my heart. I had to escape. I had to survive. But every time I took another step, the sound of footsteps behind me grew louder, more distinct, until it felt like they were no longer just behind me, but on top of me. I stumbled, nearly tripping over a rock, my mind in a frenzy. I glanced over my shoulder, just for a second, just to confirm that what I feared wasn't real. There was nothing. Nothing but the trees and the blackness of the night. But the steps were still there. Closer. Always closer. I had to keep moving. I had to keep running. But where? Where was the path? Where was the way out? I didn't know. I had no idea anymore. My vision blurred as tears welled up in my eyes, my breath ragged and shallow. I couldn't think straight. I couldn't think of anything but the footsteps, the eyes, the hunting. I had no choice but to run, even as the terror paralyzed my mind. I could feel the dread crawling up my spine, tightening its grip around me, suffocating me in its unyielding embrace. And all the while, the footsteps continued to follow, always behind me, growing louder with each passing moment. It was hunting me. It was never going to stop. The sound hit me like a punch to the gut, loud, heavy thuds that shook the very ground beneath my feet. My blood ran cold as I stumbled, almost falling over a large root that jutted out from the ground. The sound wasn't just footsteps anymore. It was something massive, something relentless, crashing through the underbrush at a terrifying pace. It was as if the forest itself had awakened, and it was hunting me. I didn't dare turn around. I couldn't. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to keep moving, to get away, to find a place where I could hide. But where? The trees towered above me, their twisted limbs reaching out like long, skeletal fingers, and the shadows between them seemed to twist and writhe as if they were alive. The forest was no longer a place of safety. It had become a maze of dark, shifting shapes, and I was trapped within it. The footsteps were closer now, thundering against the earth like the beat of a war drum. My heart was racing, my breath shallow and rapid as I looked frantically around, searching for any kind of shelter. A cave, or rock, anything. But there was nothing but the dense trees, the thick underbrush, and the oppressive darkness. Everywhere I looked, the shadows seemed to move, as if the very forest was closing in on me. The trees creaked, their branches swaying unnaturally in the windless night, and the ground beneath me felt alive, pulsing with some ancient, unseen force. The air was thick, suffocating, and every step I took felt like I was sinking deeper into the earth, trapped in this nightmare with no way out. I stumbled again, my legs shaking beneath me, and I barely caught myself against the rough bark of a tree. I had to stop. I had to think. But the footsteps, they were getting closer. They were louder now, each thud sending a fresh wave of terror through my body. There was something huge out there, moving through the forest at an unnatural speed. Whatever it wasn't trying to be quiet. It was letting me hear it, letting me know that it was close. I could feel its presence, the weight of it bearing down on me, and my mind raced, looking for a way to survive. There had to be something. A path, a clearing, something to give me a chance. But my thoughts were jumbled, the panic clouding my judgment. The thudding grew louder, and the ground beneath my feet seemed to tremble with each heavy step. My breath caught in my throat as I realized that whatever was behind me wasn't just following. It was getting closer. It was moving faster. I couldn't outrun it. I had to hide. My eyes darted around, and I spotted a small thicket of bushes to my right. It wasn't much, but it was something, somewhere to duck behind, to keep out of sight. I didn't think. I just moved, crashing through the underbrush, my hands and arms scraping against the branches as I pushed my way through. I could hear the thudding getting louder, closer, and I had to make it to the thicket. I had to. I stumbled into the dense bushes, my heart pounding in my chest, every breath feeling like it might be my last. I crouched low, pressing my back against the earth, my body trembling with fear. My mind was racing, and every sound around me seemed amplified, the quiet rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl, all of it felt so much louder in the silence that had fallen over me. I barely dared to breathe. The footsteps were right there now, so close I could feel the vibrations in the ground beneath me. My pulse thundered in my ears, and I closed my eyes, praying that whatever it was, it wouldn't see me, wouldn't find me. I could hear it now, moving past, its heavy, thunderous steps crashing through the underbrush just beyond the thicket. The forest felt like it was holding its breath, as though it, too, was waiting for the predator to pass. The only sound now was the steady thumping of my heart, the sound of my own fear that filled my ears and drowned out everything else. I didn't dare to move. Not a muscle. Not a breath. And then, just as quickly as it had started, the footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating. It was like the entire world had gone still, the air hanging thick with anticipation. I held my breath, straining to hear anything that would tell me what was happening, if the thing was still out there. But there was nothing. Only the oppressive silence, broken only by the distant rustling of leaves. I wasn't alone. I didn't know where it was, but I knew it was out there. Watching. Waiting. And I was trapped. The silence was deafening, but it didn't last. The air around me felt heavy, as if something was building, something massive was drawing nearer. And then, I saw them. The red eyes. They were closer now, brighter, burning through the darkness like twin embers in the night. At first, they had been distant, just tiny dots in the blackness, barely noticeable. But now, they were unmistakable, growing bigger, more intense, as if the creature behind them was getting closer. I froze, my heart slamming against my ribs. I couldn't look away. The eyes weren't blinking. They were just there, glowing with a terrifying, unnatural light, watching me. Staring at me. And then, a low growl rumbled through the air, deep, guttural, the sound vibrating through my very bones. It wasn't like the growl of a bear or any animal I knew. It was something otherworldly, something ancient, as if the very sound came from the earth itself, rising up to claim me. It echoed in my mind, drowning out every other thought, every other sound, as the blood in my veins turned to ice. I had to move. I had to do something. My legs were weak, trembling beneath me, but I forced myself to stand. I had to get away. The only option, the only chance for survival, was to climb, to get as high as I could, out of its reach. My gaze darted around, desperately searching for a tree with thick enough branches to support my weight. I spotted one nearby, a tall pine with low-hanging branches. Without thinking, I ran toward it, my hands reaching for the rough bark, my breath shallow with panic. But as I grabbed onto the tree, I realized just how exhausted I was. The muscles in my arms screamed in protest, and I felt like I was moving through molasses. I pulled myself up, but the effort was too much. My body wouldn't cooperate. I could barely get my feet off the ground before my hands slipped, and I tumbled back to the forest floor, landing with a harsh thud. I gasped for air, my heart hammering in my chest. My body was giving out. I couldn't even climb a damn tree. The growl came again, louder this time, like a warning. The eyes, those glowing red eyes, were still there, still staring, moving closer. They were not just watching anymore. They were approaching. I scrambled to my feet, panic surging through me like a tidal wave. My mind was spinning, my thoughts swirling in chaos. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't run, I couldn't climb. Every movement I made felt like it was too slow, too weak. And then it hit me. What if this wasn't a bear? What if it wasn't anything natural at all? What if I wasn't being chased by some animal? What if I was being hunted by something beyond the natural world? The thought sent a chill through me, colder than any night air. The stories I had heard before, the ghost bear, the creature that haunted the woods of Yellowstone, suddenly felt all too real. Could it be? Could this be the very thing they'd warned about? The ground beneath me seemed to shift, the trees bending toward me, their shadows stretching long and dark like fingers reaching out to claim me. The eyes were so close now that I could see them clearly, glowing with an intensity that felt unnatural. The growl had stopped, but I could feel its presence, looming over me like a dark cloud. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The fear was suffocating, drowning me in its grip. My mind was slipping. Was I imagining this? Was it just my mind playing tricks on me in the darkness, fueled by fear and exhaustion? Or was this real? What if I was truly being hunted? Not by something from this world, but by something otherworldly? Something that had no reason, no purpose, except to stalk and kill. I had to move. I had to do something. But I couldn't think. My legs were trembling. My hands were shaking. Every step I took felt like I was sinking deeper into a nightmare that I couldn't escape. The eyes were almost upon me now. There was no way out. I couldn't take it anymore. The forest was closing in around me. The eyes were too close, too relentless. I needed to find shelter, anything that could offer a sliver of safety, even if just for a moment. I pushed forward through the darkness, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. My legs were weak, my body trembling, but I didn't stop. I had to keep moving. The shadow in the forest was hunting me, and there was no time to hesitate. And then, through the trees, I saw it. A faint shape, something that didn't belong in the wilderness. A small cabin, tucked away in the woods, its outline barely visible in the gloom. My heart leaped. This was it. My chance. I had to make it there. I stumbled toward it, my footsteps clumsy, the sound of my own movement drowned out by the pounding in my chest. I could barely think, barely focus on anything except the cabin, the only hope I had. As I got closer, I saw the door, old and weathered, a flicker of light spilling from a crack in the window. It seemed almost too perfect, too welcoming. But then I heard it. A scraping sound. Slow, deliberate, almost rhythmic. Claws. Scratching at the door. My heart stopped. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I froze in place, unable to move, unable to breathe. It was unmistakable, the sound of something large, something powerful, dragging its claws across the wood. It was right there. Just outside the cabin. Whatever it was waiting. It was hungry. And I was its prey. I stood frozen for what felt like an eternity, the sound of scratching growing louder with each passing second, the scrape of claws against wood sending icy tendrils of terror down my spine. There was no escape. No way out. The creature was outside, and I was trapped. Panic surged through me, quick and brutal, squeezing the breath out of my chest. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't stay outside either. There was no choice. I had to go in. I had to get inside that cabin. With trembling hands, I reached for the door handle, barely able to make my fingers obey. It was cold, slick with moisture, as if the air itself was trying to stop me. But I yanked it open. The door creaked loudly in protest, a sound that echoed through the night like a scream. I didn't care. I rushed inside, slamming it shut behind me with all the strength I could muster, my heart racing in my chest. The room inside was small, dimly lit by the flickering light from a lantern in the corner. The air was stale, thick with the scent of old wood and dust. I took a moment to breathe. My chest heaved with the effort, my head spinning from the panic and exhaustion. But that brief moment of relief shattered when I heard it again, the scraping sound, this time louder, more frantic. The creature was circling the cabin, its claws dragging along the walls, as if it were testing the structure, feeling for a weak spot, a way in. I backed away from the door, my breath catching in my throat. The presence outside was relentless. It didn't care that I was inside now. It wasn't deterred. It was still out there. And I knew it wasn't going to leave. I turned toward the cabin's interior, looking for anything that might help, anything I could use to defend myself. But there was nothing. Just old furniture, broken pieces of furniture, and dust-covered shelves. A sense of dread settled over me. I was in a trap. The scratching continued, becoming louder and more insistent, now moving around the entire cabin like it was assessing its next move. I could almost hear the thing breathing, could almost feel the weight of its gaze on me, as though it could see me through the walls. I backed into a corner, the tiny cabin suddenly feeling even smaller, even more suffocating. The feeling of being watched, hunted, was overwhelming. I thought I could hear my pulse in my ears, the sound of my racing heart, as if the creature could hear it too. Could it sense my fear? I had no answers. No way to explain what was happening. But I knew one thing, this was far beyond anything I could survive alone. And no matter how small the cabin seemed, it wasn't safe enough. The creature outside wasn't stopping. And I was out of time. The sound of the creature outside the cabin was growing louder, more frantic. The air in the small space was thick with the weight of it, pressing down on me, suffocating me with its presence. The growl reverberated through the walls, deep and guttural, vibrating in my bones, a reminder that whatever it was, whatever hunted me, it wasn't going away. The scratching on the wood intensified, now accompanied by a low rumbling growl that shook the very foundations of the cabin. The creature was circling, prowling around the building like a predator stalking its prey, its eyes fixed on me, even though it couldn't see me. I could almost hear its breathing, deep and slow, drawing nearer with each passing second. The darkness outside felt alive, suffused with an oppressive weight, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. I pressed my back against the cold, rough wall, hoping for something, anything, that might give me a moment of peace, a moment of escape. But I knew it was futile. The thing outside wasn't going to stop. It was relentless. I was trapped. There was no way out. My thoughts raced. What had I gotten myself into? I had always thought the stories of the ghost bear were just that, stories, local legends designed to keep tourists at bay. But now, in the face of whatever hunted me, I realized the truth. The creature outside wasn't just a bear. It wasn't just some animal. It was something else, something ancient and hungry, something that wouldn't stop until it had me. I could feel it. Feel its eyes, those glowing red eyes, piercing through the walls, through the very air. I wasn't safe. Not in here. Not anywhere. But I couldn't just stay hidden. I couldn't stay locked away, waiting to be torn apart by whatever was on the other side of that door. The growl was louder now, closer, the creature's steps circling the cabin like a clock ticking down, marking the time until it would finally breach the walls and claim me. No. I wouldn't die here in this cabin, alone, a victim of something I didn't understand. I wasn't going to wait for it to drag me out of my hiding place. I couldn't let fear consume me any longer. I had to face it. Whatever it was out there, I had to confront it. The thought terrified me, sending a shiver of dread through every fiber of my being. But there was no choice. It was either face whatever hunted me, or let it find me when it was ready. And I knew the longer I waited, the worse it would be. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breath, forcing myself to think clearly. The growl outside was growing louder, closer, until I could feel it in my chest, a low vibration beneath the floorboards. It was circling, waiting for the moment to strike. I had no weapon, no defense, but I had to act. The cabin was too small, too vulnerable. If I stayed here, the thing would tear its way in. The decision hit me like a jolt of electricity. There was no way out, no escape. The only chance I had was to face it, head on. I gritted my teeth, my fists clenched at my sides. I had no plan, no strategy, but I couldn't stay hidden any longer. It was now or never. The creature would keep hunting until it had me. I moved toward the door, my breath shallow and erratic. Every step felt like it might be my last. But I couldn't hesitate anymore. I reached for the door handle. I could hear the growl getting closer, like a growling storm about to break. This was it. The moment where everything would change. I was about to step into the darkness. And there was no turning back. I stepped outside, my legs trembling beneath me, my mind a haze of fear and adrenaline. The cabin door slammed shut behind me, a hollow echo in the night. I stood there for a moment, frozen, trying to make sense of what was happening. I was weaponless, terrified, and utterly alone in the vastness of the forest. The air around me was thick, charged with an unnatural tension. The silence of the woods felt oppressive, as though the very earth was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The trees around me loomed like dark sentinels, their twisted shapes barely visible in the dim moonlight. The forest was a maze of shadows, each one more menacing than the last. I could feel the weight of it all pressing in on me. There was no escape now. The hunt had begun. A sudden sound from behind me shattered the stillness, a low, guttural growl that vibrated through my bones. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't have to turn to know what was behind me. I could feel it, that oppressive presence, the weight of its eyes on me. I had been right. It wasn't just a myth. It wasn't just a legend. The ghost bear was real. I turned slowly, my body stiff with dread, my throat tight with fear. And then I saw it. Those glowing red eyes. Unblinking. Cold. Staring right at me. It was closer now, only a few yards away, emerging from the shadows like a specter of the woods. The shape was massive, its body outlined by the moonlight, but it was still shrouded in darkness, its full form impossible to make out. But those eyes were unmistakable. They burned with an eerie intensity, locked onto me like a predator watching its prey. The growl rumbled again, louder this time, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to shake the very ground beneath my feet. I froze, unable to move, unable to breathe. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my body wouldn't obey. I was paralyzed, trapped in the grip of terror. The creature, whatever it was, stood there, watching me, waiting. It wasn't in a hurry. It didn't need to be. It had all the time in the world. The silence stretched on, broken only by the steady, rhythmic sound of its breathing. It was close enough now that I could feel the heat of its presence, a warmth that contrasted sharply with the chill of the night air. My heart pounded in my chest, but there was no place to hide. No safe corner to retreat to. I tried to speak, to demand it leave me alone, but my voice caught in my throat. My hands were shaking, my knees weak with fear. I had no weapons, no means of defending myself. I was nothing but an unarmed, terrified human standing in the presence of something far beyond my understanding. The creature didn't move, didn't make another sound. It just stood there, its eyes burning into mine, as if waiting for something. I had no idea what it wanted, or why it had come for me. But I knew one thing, this wasn't going to end until I made a choice. I could try to run, but I knew deep down that it would be useless. I could try to fight, but I had nothing to fight with. The creature didn't need to kill me right away. It could savor this moment, draw it out, enjoy the terror it had inflicted. But I couldn't just stand there, paralyzed, waiting for it to make the next move. I had to face it. I had no choice. It was me or it. I took a deep breath, my chest tightening with the effort. The growl echoed through the air again, louder now, almost like a challenge. A warning. This was it. There was no more running. No more hiding. I stepped forward, one shaky step at a time, forcing myself to move. The creature's eyes flickered for a moment, narrowing in response, as if it were sizing me up. It was still waiting. Still watching. With every step I took, the distance between us closed. I could feel the weight of its gaze on me, its presence suffocating, consuming the space around us. But I wasn't going to back down. Not now. I had to face it. And whatever happened next, I had to be ready. The moment I took that first step forward, the world around me seemed to shift. The air grew heavier, colder, like the forest itself was bracing for something. I could feel the eyes on me, burning into my skin. Every step I took brought me closer to the thing that had haunted this place for as long as the locals could remember. It was no longer just a shadow, no longer just a pair of glowing eyes. It was real. It was standing right in front of me. And then I saw it. The ghost bear. It emerged from the shadows, its massive form slowly materializing in the dim moonlight. My breath caught in my throat as I looked up, and up, there was no end to its size. Its body was enormous, far larger than any bear I had ever seen, even in the wilds of Yellowstone. Its fur was dark as midnight, yet it shimmered in the flickering light, as if it were made of shadows themselves. It loomed over me, towering like a mountain, a creature of nightmares that had stepped into this world from somewhere else. But it wasn't just its size that struck terror into my heart. It was its eyes. Those glowing red eyes, burning like hot embers in the dark, staring down at me with an intensity that made my blood run cold. They were not just eyes, they were something more. Something ancient. Something otherworldly. The growl rumbled in its chest again, deep and guttural, vibrating the ground beneath me. I could feel it in my bones, the power of it, the force of its presence. It wasn't a bear. It couldn't be. It wasn't anything that belonged to this world. There was a darkness to it, a presence that seemed to defy everything I knew about nature, about the laws of the earth. It was a creature from another time, another plane, a guardian of the wilds that had no place in the reality I knew. My heart hammered in my chest, a deafening roar in my ears. My legs felt weak, as though they might give out at any moment. Every part of me screamed to run, to turn and flee into the night. But I couldn't move. The fear was paralyzing, seizing every muscle in my body. It was like being trapped in a nightmare where I couldn't wake up, where escape was impossible. The bear, if it could even be called that, took a slow step forward. The ground seemed to tremble beneath its paws. It moved with a grace that belied its size, as though it had all the time in the world. Its eyes never left me, watching me with an unblinking stare, waiting for something, waiting for me to make the next move. I tried to swallow, but my throat was dry, my mouth like sandpaper. My body shook, not just from the cold, but from the sheer magnitude of the terror that coursed through me. I knew that this was it. This was the moment where I either stood my ground or ran. But there was no running from this. No escaping it. The bear was here, and it wasn't going anywhere. But even in the face of overwhelming fear, I forced myself to take another step forward. My heart pounded in my ears, but I couldn't let it control me. I had to show that I wasn't prey. I had to face it, even if it meant my end. I stood there, rooted to the spot, staring up at this otherworldly creature, this ghost bear that haunted the very soul of the forest. My breath hitched in my chest as I tried to steady myself. There was nothing left but me and this thing. And in that moment, I realized if I didn't confront it, it would consume me, mind and body. I had no choice but to face the beast. With the weight of its gaze still burning into me, I whispered into the darkness, "I'm not afraid of you." But even as the words left my lips, I could feel the lie in them. The fear was overwhelming, seeping into every corner of my mind, clawing at my thoughts. But I couldn't let it break me. I couldn't let it win. The ghost bear took another step forward, its eyes glowing brighter now, the fire within them growing stronger. The world around us seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of us in this frozen moment. The wind howled through the trees, but all I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat, the rush of blood in my ears. It was a battle of wills now, a test of survival, and I wasn't sure who would win. The ghost bear stood motionless, its massive body looming in front of me, but its eyes, they never left mine. They were fixed, unblinking, glowing with an intensity that felt like a fire searing through my very soul. It didn't move. It didn't make a sound. It just watched, its gaze steady and unnerving, like it was studying me, learning me. My breath came in ragged gasps, each one colder than the last. The world around us seemed to vanish, leaving only the two of us in this terrifying standoff. My body was frozen, and the weight of its eyes pressed down on me like a vice. The silence stretched on, stretching the seconds into hours. I couldn't look away. I couldn't even blink. Every part of me screamed to run, to escape, but my legs refused to move. I swallowed hard, the dry, painful sensation in my throat making it feel like I was choking. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. This was a nightmare. It had to be. There was no other explanation. The stories, the rumors, they were just stories. They had to be. This couldn't be real. It was impossible. But then, reality slammed back into me with a sharp jolt. This was real. The creature in front of me wasn't some figment of my imagination. It was real. And I had no idea what it wanted, why it had come for me, or what I was supposed to do next. My voice finally broke the silence, shaky and panicked. What do you want? I heard the words escape my lips, but they sounded foreign, weak, as though I wasn't speaking at all. I'm not a threat. The words felt hollow as soon as I spoke them. How could I not be a threat? I was standing here, staring at a creature that didn't belong in this world, a thing that was older than anything I could comprehend. I had no weapons, no means of defending myself. What kind of a threat could I be? A frightened human, trembling in the presence of a ghost bear? The growl rumbled deep in the creature's chest, low and dangerous, a sound that seemed to come from the very depths of the earth. It was a warning, but it didn't come closer. It didn't attack. It just waited. My thoughts spun faster, my mind desperately trying to rationalize the situation. It was just an animal, I told myself. A bear, a normal bear, just a really big, really strange bear. Maybe it had been scared by my presence, just like I was scared by it. Maybe it didn't want to hurt me. It was just a bear, I kept telling myself over and over again. But I knew deep down, I knew with a certainty that gnawed in my insides, that this wasn't just a bear. It couldn't be. No bear I'd ever seen had eyes like that. No bear I'd ever seen had this presence, this unnatural weight that made the air around me feel suffocating. No bear had ever stood still like this, waiting for me to make the next move. It was something else. Something far darker. Something that didn't belong to this world. I took a step back, slowly, almost imperceptibly, as though hoping that the bear wouldn't notice. But it didn't move. It didn't react. It didn't have to. Its eyes stayed locked on mine, unmoving, unwavering. It was waiting for something, and I wasn't sure what that something was, but I knew I had to face it, whatever it was. A tremor ran through me, and my voice cracked as I tried to steady it. "I'm not here to hurt you," I whispered, though even I didn't believe it. "I'm just lost. I just want to get out of here." The bear's eyes didn't change. There was no sign of recognition, no sign that it understood. It just watched, as if deciding something, as if trying to read me, to measure me. The silence stretched again, and I could feel my own pulse thundering in my ears. Every second felt like 1,000 years. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening, trying to convince myself that there was some reasonable explanation. Maybe it was just a strange, mutated bear. Maybe it wasn't even real, and I was just hallucinating from exhaustion or fear. Maybe it was some kind of spirit, some trick of the forest. But the more I tried to rationalize, the more my panic swelled. Every thought I had felt like a lie. The reality of the situation was too impossible to ignore. There was no way to explain this. And then I realized, with a sickening certainty, that no amount of reasoning was going to change what was happening. I wasn't just lost in the woods. I was standing face to face with something I didn't understand, something that didn't belong here. And no matter what I said, no matter how I tried to explain myself, it wasn't listening. It was just watching, waiting, deciding. Time seemed to slow as the bear took a single, deliberate step forward. The ground beneath my feet trembled, the vibrations from its massive form running up through the soles of my boots, reverberating into my chest. My breath caught in my throat as the creature's shadow expanded, swallowing the moonlight, its enormous body blocking out the pale glow that had once illuminated the forest. The trees around us seemed to shrink into the darkness as the bear's form grew ever larger. I could feel the weight of its presence pressing down on me, more oppressive than the chill of the night air. The low growl rumbled deep within the beast's chest, a sound that seemed to shake the very earth itself. It was a growl unlike any bear I had ever heard, full of power, menace, and ancient rage. It felt as though the sound was coming from the depths of the earth, not just from the throat of the creature in front of me. Every muscle in my body tensed, and my heart began to race faster, the adrenaline surging through my veins, pushing the fear to a higher pitch. I wanted to move, wanted to run, but my feet felt rooted to the ground, as if the bear's presence had seeped into the soil, holding me in place. Its red eyes were fixed on me, unblinking, burning with a dark fire that seared into my very soul. There was no way to escape it. There was no way to outrun it. This wasn't just an animal, it was something far more powerful, more ancient than anything I had ever known. The growl grew louder, deeper. It reverberated in my bones, shaking me to my core. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to flee, to run as fast and as far as I could, but the fear kept me paralyzed. My body refused to obey my mind. It was like I was trapped in the grip of some primal force beyond my control. I knew I had to make a choice. Fight or flee. But how could I fight something like this? How could I stand against a creature so vast, so powerful, that it seemed to command the very darkness around us? It was no ordinary bear. It was a ghost, a protector, a force of nature itself, and in that moment, I felt so small, so insignificant. A part of me wanted to shout, to beg, to plead for my life, but I knew it wouldn't make a difference. It was watching me, studying me, waiting for something, perhaps my next move, perhaps my fear. Every instinct I had screamed to run. But where would I go? What direction could I take that would keep me safe? There was no escape. No shelter. The woods, the moon, the trees, they were all watching me now, as if they, too, were waiting for the outcome. The sound of the bear's growl filled the air, vibrating with such intensity that it felt like the forest itself was holding its breath. I knew, deep down, that if I turned and ran, it would chase me. It would catch me. But if I stayed, if I stood my ground, I didn't know what would happen. Would it attack? Would it kill me? Or was this some twisted test, a decision I had to make? My heart pounded in my chest, my mind racing to comprehend the impossibility of it all. I was standing on the edge of something ancient and unknown. Every part of me screamed for survival, for escape, but there was no clear path. There was no way to prepare for what was about to happen. The bear took another step forward, its massive paws leaving deep imprints in the earth. The air grew thicker, heavier, as though the very atmosphere was saturated with danger. I could see its breath now, misting in the cold air. The tension in the space between us grew unbearable, suffocating, like the forest was closing in around me. I stood there, frozen, the decision weighing heavily on me. The fear was suffocating, but I couldn't make the choice, not yet. The moment the bear moved, I snapped into action. I didn't think, I just ran. My legs propelled me forward, stumbling through the underbrush, branches slapping in my face as I tore through the forest. My heart hammered in my chest, adrenaline flooding my veins, but it wasn't enough. The fear, the weight of the bear's presence, still clung to me, keeping me tethered to the nightmare that was unfolding. I glanced over my shoulder, just for a split second, and that was enough. The bear was right behind me. It moved faster than anything so massive should be able to. In the blink of an eye, it closed the distance between us, its massive paws thudding against the ground with terrifying force. The sound of its chase was deafening, a rhythm that echoed in the night like thunder, and I realized, with growing horror, that I had no chance of outrunning it. I wasn't prepared. I wasn't fast enough. The ground beneath me seemed to shift, each step feeling like it was taking me deeper into the woods, deeper into the unknown. My lungs burned as I pushed myself harder, trying to gain some distance, but my legs were growing weaker. The bear's growl echoed through the trees, a low, menacing sound that reverberated in my bones. Every few seconds, I heard the thudding of its enormous paws, each one closer than the last. It was like a pulse, its presence an undeniable force, one that I couldn't escape. I stumbled again, crashing into a tree, and my body screamed in protest, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. My mind was racing, trying to process what was happening. Was this real? Was I dreaming? How could something like this even exist? But the more I ran, the more the reality settled in. This wasn't just a nightmare. The ghost bear was real, and it was hunting me. I darted between the trees, desperately searching for some place to hide, but the forest was a blur now. My thoughts were scattered, and every movement I made seemed to echo, betraying my position. There was no escape. There was no safety. I glanced over my shoulder again. The bear was still there, just behind me, its eyes glowing brighter than ever, like twin fireballs tracking my every move. Its jaws opened in a silent snarl, and I could hear the scrape of its claws against the ground, ready to strike. I pushed harder, desperate to find some sort of refuge, but I knew, deep down, that it was futile. My breath came in ragged gasps, my muscles aching from the effort, but I couldn't outrun it. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I was no match for this creature. The gap between us was closing faster than I could process, and there was nothing I could do to change that. And then, like the world had shifted beneath my feet, I understood. I had made a fatal mistake. I had thought I could escape. I had thought that running would save me. But in reality, the moment I turned to flee, I sealed my fate. The ghost bear wasn't just a force of nature. It was a predator, and I was its prey. The sound of its heavy footsteps grew louder, and the darkness around me deepened. I could feel the bear's presence closing in, suffocating the space between us. It was inevitable. The chase was coming to an end, and there was no way out. As the bear's growl grew louder, closer, I realized the truth. There was nowhere to run. There was only one thing left to face, the consequence of my fear. I didn't dare look back this time. My body moved on instinct, every nerve screaming as I ran blindly through the forest. The only sound louder than my pounding heart was the deafening rhythm of the bear's footsteps. I could feel the weight of its presence, like a shadow that was slowly consuming the space between us, its massive form closing in with each desperate step I took. The night seemed to press in around me. The trees, the rocks, the underbrush, everything blurred together, a maze of shadows and fear. My breath came in ragged gasps, my lungs burning as I pushed myself harder. My legs ached, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't afford to stop. The ground beneath me seemed to tremble with every thunderous step the bear took, and with each tremor, my fear deepened. It was right there, so close now, that I could feel the ground shake as it chased me, its growls reverberating through the forest like an earthquake. Every instinct told me to run faster, but I was already giving everything I had. My body was screaming in protest, but I forced my feet to move, to push forward through the pain, through the terror. It was getting closer. I could hear it more clearly now, its massive paws crushing the earth, every step coming closer to me. I couldn't understand how something so large could move with such speed. How could it keep up? How could it be gaining on me? The answer was clear, and it made my blood run cold. It wasn't trying to catch me. It was playing with me. It was savoring the chase, enjoying the fear that pulsed from me like a beacon. The forest had become a blur of trees and shadow, my surroundings disorienting and surreal. I had no idea where I was going, no idea where the path might lead. All I knew was that the bear was still behind me, growing closer. The very air seemed to vibrate with the creature's hunger, a low, throaty growl that seemed to come from the ground itself. I glanced briefly over my shoulder, heart in my throat, and for just a second, I saw the flash of red eyes, burning bright against the dark backdrop of the woods. It was a reminder that no matter how fast I ran, No matter how desperately I tried to flee, I was still trapped in this nightmare. The sound of its pursuit echoed in my ears, the thudding footsteps so loud now that it was almost impossible to believe they were real. It was as if the forest itself had joined in, bending to the will of the beast. The trees seemed to close in around me, the darkness pressing in on all sides. I stumbled, the ground beneath me slick and uneven, my feet sliding against the wet soil. Panic surged in my chest as I barely regained my footing, my mind struggling to stay focused, to keep moving. I had to survive. I had to get away. But with every step, the creature was there, its presence looming, a specter that refused to be outrun. I couldn't make sense of it. The fear, the urgency, it all felt unreal. But the bear's growl, growing louder and deeper, was a constant reminder that it was all too real. It wasn't just some illusion. It wasn't a bad dream. The ghost bear was real, and it was right behind me, closing in with terrifying speed. The earth trembled again, a ripple that spread through my body as I stumbled forward, the weight of the chase bearing down on me with crushing force. With every breath, every step, I could feel my hopes slipping away, my strength fading. I had to do something. I had to figure out a way to escape this nightmare before it was too late. But what could I do? The bear was relentless, its power unstoppable. And the longer I ran, the more I realized the truth. I wasn't running to safety. I was just running to my death. The sound of the bear's footsteps was deafening now, and I knew, I could feel it, that the moment I stopped, the chase would be over. And then, there would be no more running. I didn't see the route until it was too late. My foot caught it, and I went down hard, my body crashing into the forest floor with a sickening thud. The wind was knocked from my lungs, and for a moment, I lay there, dazed, my hands scraping against the dirt as I tried to regain my breath. I could hear the bear, its heavy footsteps still echoing in the distance, closer now, much closer. Every thundering step was a reminder that it was still there, still hunting me, its presence bearing down on me like a storm. Panic surged through me as I scrambled to my feet, the forest spinning around me. My legs trembled, my heart hammering in my chest, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't think about the pain in my arms or the bruises from the fall. I had to run. I had to survive. But the moment I stood, I knew it was too late. The air felt thick, oppressive, and I could feel the bear's presence closing in like an iron fist. My breathing was erratic, sharp gasps cutting through the night as I stumbled forward, trying to put distance between myself and the creature. My feet slipped again, and I nearly went down, but I caught myself. The growl was closer now. It vibrated through my bones, a sound so deep and guttural that I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. My mind raced, the panic swelling, clouding my thoughts. I had to get away. I had to find a way out of this nightmare, but there was nowhere left to run. The trees, the rocks, they all seemed to close in around me, trapping me in this living nightmare. I glanced over my shoulder, barely able to process what I was seeing. The bear was so close now that I could almost feel its breath on my neck, its glowing eyes locked on me with a deadly intensity. It moved with terrifying speed, its massive body slicing through the trees with ease, its paws thudding against the ground like a war drum. The fear that had been building in my chest finally took root, spreading through my veins like ice. It wasn't just chasing me anymore. It was toying with me, like a hunter playing with its prey. The thought hit me like a cold wave. I wasn't just running from the bear. I was running from death. My mind scrambled for an escape plan, but there were no answers. No place to hide. No way out. All I had was the forest, and the forest was as much a prison as it was a sanctuary. The trees blurred around me, the ground uneven beneath my feet, every step feeling like I was sinking deeper into the trap. I had no idea where I was anymore, no idea how much farther I had to go. But I knew one thing, the bear was right behind me, and every second counted. It was too fast. Too relentless. I tripped again, my foot catching on a vine, and I fell forward, my body crashing against the earth once more. This time, I didn't have the strength to get up. My hands trembled as I pushed against the dirt, but the bear was too close, its shadow looming over me like a dark cloud. My chest tightened with fear, and my mind went blank as I realized there was no escape. There was no hope. The bear was here, and it was going to catch me. My legs were giving out. Every step felt heavier than the last, and the sounds of the forest were now drowned out by the growing growl behind me, deep and menacing, like the sound of the earth itself groaning in pain. I could feel the bear's presence drawing nearer, the ground shaking with each step it took, and in that moment, I knew there was no way out. I had no plan left, no strategy, just pure desperation driving my movements. But then, through the fog of panic, I saw it, a narrow ravine, the earth split open in a jagged line, a small hope in the form of a potential escape. It was barely wide enough for me to squeeze through, but maybe, just maybe, the bear wouldn't be able to follow me there. I didn't hesitate. I pushed myself forward, ignoring the sharp branches that whipped at my face, ignoring the pain in my side from running too long. The ravine was my only chance. I scrambled down into the narrow trench, the walls on either side pressing close as I tried to get to the bottom. The dirt was loose, and my hands slipped as I tried to steady myself. I was so close. Just a little further, and I might be safe. Maybe the bear would lose track of me. Maybe it would turn away. But then I heard it, those deep, terrible footsteps again, only this time, they weren't fading away. They were growing louder, faster. My breath caught in my throat as I looked up, my heart sinking. The growl wasn't in the distance anymore. It was right there, right at the edge of the ravine. I looked up, my eyes widening in disbelief, just as the shadow of the bear loomed over me. The creature's massive form stood on the other side of the ravine, staring down at me with those unblinking red eyes, like an unearthly fire burning in the dark. And then, without warning, it leapt. The bear sailed through the air with an ease that seemed impossible for such a massive creature. It landed with a heavy thud just a few feet away from me, shaking the ground beneath me as the earth seemed to tremble under its weight. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest, my legs unable to move. I was trapped. There was no way out. The ravine that had once seemed like my salvation was now nothing more than a shallow grave, and the ghost bear was standing in front of me, its glowing eyes locked onto mine, its massive body blocking any escape. Panic surged through me, a cold, paralyzing wave. I had nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The bear was too close, too fast. The growl rumbled from deep within its chest, louder now, reverberating through the air like thunder. The earth seemed to shake with its fury. I tried to climb up the side of the ravine, my fingers scraping at the loose dirt, but the wall was too steep, too treacherous. The more I scrambled, the more I slipped. I couldn't even get a foothold. My mind raced in a frantic blur, every possible escape route disappearing before I could even form the thought. The bear took a step forward, its enormous paw coming down with a heavy, crushing sound, and I knew this was it. There was no way out. No more running. No more hiding. The ghost bear was here. And it had me. I was backing away, my breath ragged, my mind spiraling in sheer panic. The ravine had been my last hope, but it was no use. Now, as I turned frantically, searching for any other path, I realized there was nowhere left to go. The narrow passage had led me into a dead end. The walls of the ravine rose steeply on either side of me, the jagged rocks a cruel barrier. No way out. My hands were shaking violently as I pressed them against the cold stone, desperate to find some hidden path, some hidden crack that could give me a chance. But there was nothing. I was trapped, completely, utterly trapped. I turned back toward the bear, my stomach dropping at the sight of it closing in. The ground beneath me trembled as it moved, its enormous paws making the earth shudder with every step. Its eyes, those terrifying red eyes, burned through the darkness with an unnatural intensity. The glow seemed to flicker, as if the very light within them was alive, a malicious fire that bore into my soul. I swallowed hard, feeling my throat constrict. My heart felt like it was about to explode as the bear drew closer, each step deliberate, slow, and filled with an overwhelming sense of inevitability. It was too close now. I could smell its musky, damp fur, hear the steady, heavy growl reverberating from deep within its chest. My legs gave way beneath me, and I stumbled back into the rock wall, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I had no strength left. No plan. No chance. I thought back to those stories, the warnings I had heard from the locals, the ghost bear that haunted these woods. I had dismissed them as just tales, as superstition. But now, staring into the glowing eyes of the beast, I knew the truth. It wasn't just a bear. It was something else. Something beyond this world. I heard a low growl, and for a moment, everything else faded away. There was only the sound of my racing heart, the sharp inhale of my breath, and the terrible presence of the creature closing in. It was too late to run. There was no place to hide. No escape. I closed my eyes, my body shaking with the weight of my fear. There was nothing more I could do. The bear was mere feet away now, its breath hot and heavy against my skin, and I knew this was the end. In the silence that followed, I could hear my own heartbeat. It was deafening. And then, the first step of the end came. The bear charged. I didn't even have time to scream. Its massive body hurtled toward me like a freight train, the sound of its growl vibrating through the air, shaking the very ground beneath my feet. My heart seemed to stop, caught in the grip of pure terror. My body froze, every muscle locking in place, unable to move, unable to react. There was no running, no hiding, no way to escape. The bear was faster than anything I had ever imagined, and it was going to reach me. Its glowing eyes locked onto mine with a haunting intensity, and in that moment, all I could think about was how utterly powerless I was. I braced myself, my hands trembling as I prepared for the impact, the inevitable collision with the beast that would end it all. Time seemed to stretch. Every second felt like an eternity, the air thick with tension. The bear was so close now I could feel the heat radiating from its massive body, the force of its charge sending tremors through the earth. Its jaws were open wide, ready to snap shut, its claws gleaming with a deadly intent. I closed my eyes, bracing for the impact that I knew would come, the sharp pain, the crushing weight of its body, the end of everything. And then, the ground shook violently, and for one fleeting moment, I thought I felt the very earth tremble beneath my feet as the beast leapt, just before it was too late. The world went still. The final, dramatic moment hung in the air, leaving everything in a breathless, suspended silence. And then, everything went dark. The world around me seemed to freeze, time stretching into an unbearable eternity. My legs were useless, my body locked in a paralyzing grip of fear. I stood there, staring at the ghost bear, the creature that had haunted my every step, the entity that was no longer just a myth or a nightmare. It was real, and it was right here, in front of me. Its eyes burned with an unholy light, and its monstrous form loomed over me like some ancient, untamable force. It was more than just a bear. It was something ancient, something that defied all logic, all reason. The growl that emanated from the bear's throat was like nothing I had ever heard. It was deep, guttural, and filled with a malevolent power that seemed to shake the very earth beneath my feet. The sound rattled my bones, sending ripples of dread through my chest, as if the bear's roar were a warning of the destruction it was capable of. I wanted to move, to run, to flee from the overwhelming presence of the creature, but my legs wouldn't obey. My body was completely frozen, overwhelmed by the fear that had taken root deep in my soul. Every instinct screamed at me to get away, but I couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't escape. But then, in the midst of the terror, something shifted. A flicker of defiance sparked within me, small but enough to pierce through the numbness that had taken over. I could feel the last of my strength, the remnants of my will to survive, gathering in my chest. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to push back against the paralyzing fear. I forced my feet to shift, a hesitant movement at first, but then a little more steady. The bear's roar intensified, a primal sound that made the ground quake and the trees tremble, but I refused to give in. My breathing was shallow, ragged, my heart pounding in my chest as I stepped forward, slowly, cautiously. The bear's eyes never left me, its gaze unblinking, unfeeling, as it towered before me. I wasn't ready. I wasn't prepared. But I couldn't just stand here, helpless and waiting for the end. The fear still gripped me, but I forced my legs to move. I had no weapon, no defense, only the raw, desperate need to survive. And as I gathered the last of my strength, I braced myself. The bear's roar rumbled again, louder than before, and I knew that whatever happened next, I was about to face something that could tear me apart. It was now or never. Panic surged through me like a tidal wave, but I forced myself to think. I had to do something, anything. The bear's eyes glowed brighter with every passing second, like twin fiery orbs burning through the darkness. It was almost as if it were enjoying my fear, savoring the terror it instilled in me. But I wasn't going to let it win. Not without a fight. I scrambled frantically, my hands searching for something, anything, that could be used as a weapon. My fingers brushed against rocks scattered on the ground, jagged and rough. Desperation drove me as I picked one up, my hands trembling. With all the strength I could muster, I hurled the rock toward the bear, aiming for its massive form. It was a futile effort, but I had to try. The rock struck the bear's side with a dull thud, but it barely seemed to notice. The creature's gaze remained fixed on me, unwavering, as if the impact had no more effect than a fly landing on its fur. The bear's massive head tilted slightly, a low rumble vibrating through its chest, and it took another step forward, its enormous paws crushing the earth beneath it with ease. I backed away, my mind racing, scrambling for a new plan. Another rock, this time larger, heavier, was within my reach. I grabbed it and hurled it at the creature, hoping the force would drive it back, even just for a moment. But again, the bear didn't flinch. It moved with an unnatural speed, sidestepping the projectile like it was nothing more than a passing nuisance. My breath quickened as I realized just how hopeless the situation was. The creature was not just a bear, not just a beast of nature. It was something more, something that defied the laws of nature, something that moved with a supernatural, otherworldly speed. No matter what I threw at it, no matter how much I tried to outsmart it, it would not be deterred. I could feel the cold sweat on my forehead, my heart beat a drum in my chest. My mind raced through every possible escape, every possibility, but they all ended in the same place, no way out. The bear's slow, deliberate approach continued. Its eyes locked onto mine, unblinking, and it seemed to draw nearer with every passing second. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. My legs wouldn't move. Even if I did, it would be pointless. The bear was faster than I could ever hope to be. A sinking feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. I had known, deep down, that I might not make it out of this. But now, in this moment, I truly understood that survival was no longer an option. The bear was inevitable. Its presence was unstoppable. I was out of options. And as I stood there, frozen in fear, the realization hit me like a wave. I wasn't just fighting a creature from this world. I was fighting something far beyond my understanding. It was just a matter of time. I couldn't just stand there and wait for it to finish me off. Desperation surged through me like a drug, burning away the last traces of hesitation. My heart hammered in my chest, and I made one final, frantic decision. I had to run. If I could just get far enough, maybe I could outsmart it, maybe I could find a way to survive. Without thinking, I turned and bolted in the opposite direction, my legs moving faster than they had before. The fear propelling me was primal, raw, instinctual, pushing me to keep running even though every part of me screamed that it was futile. The ground beneath my feet seemed to shift with each hurried step, as if the forest itself was closing in on me. I didn't dare look back. I couldn't. But the air around me was thick with a suffocating presence, and I could hear it, the low, rhythmic thudding of the bear's footsteps behind me, echoing through the woods like a drumbeat. I pushed myself harder, my breath ragged and painful, my muscles screaming in protest. The trees blurred around me as I ran, my focus narrowed to the single goal of escaping the unrelenting predator that stalked me. But no matter how fast I ran, the sound of its steps grew louder, closer. It wasn't just chasing me, it was toying with me, staying just far enough behind to keep the fear alive. Every time I pushed myself forward, I could feel it gaining on me, its massive form closing in, its breath hot and heavy in the night air. I glanced over my shoulder, just for a split second, and that was enough. The glowing red eyes were there, unmistakable, burning through the darkness like twin lanterns. The bear was gaining ground, its speed unnatural, far faster than anything of its size should be capable of. It didn't tire. It didn't falter. It was relentless, closing the distance between us with every step. I pushed harder, my lungs burning, my vision swimming with exhaustion and fear. I was nearing the edge of a steep cliff, but my body was too worn out to make a sharp turn. The drop below seemed endless, and I realized, with a sickening certainty, that there was no way out. No path left. I was trapped. I stopped running, my legs giving out beneath me. I stumbled to the ground, gasping for air, my mind spinning. I had reached the edge. My only escape had been blocked by an unscalable cliff. The bear's footsteps were almost upon me now. My chest heaved with ragged breaths, and I could feel the ground trembling beneath me, each step it took sending vibrations through my bones. There was no escape. No hope left. I was surrounded by darkness, my body frozen in terror, and the glowing red eyes were now too close to ignore. I knew the end was near, but there was nothing I could do. I had run my last race. I turned slowly, my body trembling with exhaustion and fear. My legs felt like lead, my heart hammering in my chest as I faced the creature one last time. The night had become a thick, suffocating wall of darkness, and all that remained in my world was the bear, the monstrous, otherworldly presence that had stalked me, tormented me, and driven me to the edge of madness. I didn't have the strength to run anymore. I could feel the cold sweat on my skin, the bitter taste of fear in my mouth, but my body refused to flee. There was no escape. No way out. I had reached the end, and now there was only this, the final confrontation. The bear loomed before me, its massive form blocking out what little light remained in the sky. Its eyes burned with an intensity that sent chills through my very soul. The growl that rumbled in its chest was like the growl of a creature born from the depths of nightmares, deep and endless, reverberating through the air. It wasn't just a sound. It was a vibration, a low, primal force that shook the earth beneath me, threatening to tear apart my very sanity. Its eyes never left mine. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't just an animal. This was something beyond comprehension, something that lived in the realm of myth and terror. I stood there, rooted to the spot, as the bear inched closer. The air was thick, heavy with its presence. Every breath I took was shallow, strained, as if the weight of its gaze was pressing down on me, suffocating me. My mind screamed at me to run, to fight, to do anything but stand there like a helpless animal waiting for the inevitable, but my body refused to obey. It was the final battle. Survival or terror. The growl grew louder, deeper, a low, rumbling sound that seemed to vibrate the very air. My heart pounded harder, faster, my body on the edge of collapse, but I couldn't look away. I had to face it. There was no choice anymore. The bear took another step, and the ground beneath me seemed to tremble. My legs shook, but I held my ground, forcing my body to stay in place, to stay focused on the creature that was now almost upon me. It was the end. The end I had always feared, but had somehow known would come. I didn't know what would happen next, whether I would fight or whether I would die. But one thing was certain, I had reached the point of no return. The moment of truth had arrived. And as the bear's growl grew louder, closer, I knew I had no more strength, no more options left. The terror of the unknown was upon me, and I couldn't run anymore. The final moment was closing in. The bear was almost on me now. Its red eyes blazed like coals, each breath it took slow and deliberate, its massive chest rising and falling with a terrifying rhythm. The world around me felt distant, as though the forest itself had faded away, leaving only this creature and me, alone in the vast emptiness. I could hear nothing but its growls, the low rumble shaking me to my core. My muscles had frozen in place, and my mind raced, trying to grasp what was happening. How had it come to this? How had I ended up in the clutches of this nightmare? The bear's huge paw stepped forward, and it was upon me in an instant. Its shadow loomed over me like a dark omen, blocking out the stars, drowning out the night. I didn't scream. There was no point. All I could do was stand there, paralyzed by fear, waiting for the inevitable. Then it happened. With one swift movement, the bear lunged toward me. Its jaws opened wide, teeth gleaming, and I could feel the breath of its growl on my skin, like the wind before a storm. The force of its strike knocked me off my feet, sending me tumbling backward, my body crashing into the earth with a sickening thud. My heart raced, but I couldn't move, couldn't react, my body locked in shock, every muscle frozen with terror. But before I could feel its teeth, before it could deliver the fatal blow, the world around me shifted. Suddenly, the ground beneath me shook violently, sending trees crashing to the ground. A blinding light pierced through the darkness, blinding me for a moment. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the bear disappeared. The air was still, eerily quiet, like the forest was holding its breath. I gasped, struggling to get up, but everything around me felt wrong, off. The bear was gone, but I could still feel it. A presence lingered in the air, something ancient and powerful, watching me from the shadows. My head swam with confusion, and I tried to focus, to make sense of what had just happened. Had it all been a hallucination? A fever dream brought on by fear? No, the terror was still there, gnawing at my thoughts. The eyes, the growl, the sense of being hunted, it was all real. The beast had come for me, but something had interrupted its pursuit. I stumbled to my feet, my legs unsteady, my mind a whirl of confusion and fear. The forest around me was silent now, unnaturally so. But as I began to move, something shifted again, something I couldn't see, but I could feel it, like eyes watching me from the darkness. The truth was impossible to ignore now. The bear was not a bear. And whatever had happened, wherever I had gone, I knew I was no longer the same. The future? It was uncertain. And as I walked, the shadows seemed to stretch farther, and the fear never left me. I wasn't alone. Not anymore. And I would never be again. Days passed, and a search party was organized. It wasn't long before they found the protagonist's gear discarded in the middle of the woods, as if it had been left there without a second thought. The gear, backpack, flashlight, even the map, was scattered on the ground, untouched and perfectly intact. But there were no signs of a struggle. No blood. No footprints leading away from the spot. Nothing that could explain what had happened to the person who had once carried it. The team moved cautiously, scanning the dense forest, but they found no trace of the missing hiker. The trees whispered in the wind, their branches swaying, but everything was eerily still. There was no sound of wildlife, no rustling of leaves, no animals darting between the trees. The forest seemed unnaturally quiet, as if it too had been swallowed by the fear that had once plagued the protagonist. The team searched for hours, calling out their names, hoping for a response, but the only sound they heard was their own voices echoing back at them. The absence of any clues, of any trace that could lead them to the missing hiker, was unsettling. The woods were thick with tension, and every creaking branch seemed like a warning. As the search party returned empty-handed to their camp, they could feel the weight of something unspoken hanging in the air. A chill that settled over everyone, even as the night grew warmer. That night, a few members gathered around the campfire, speaking in hushed voices about what had happened. They spoke of the strange, unnerving rumors they had heard over the years about the ghost bear that haunted the forests of Yellowstone. At first, they had dismissed it as superstition. But after days of searching with no trace of the missing hiker, they couldn't ignore the nagging thought that lingered in their minds. Was it possible? Had the legend of the ghost bear been true all along? With each retelling, the story grew more terrifying, more detailed. The bear was no longer just a ghostly creature, but a guardian of the forest, a malevolent force that preyed on those who dared to wander too deep into its domain. People spoke of its glowing red eyes, the unnatural growls, the haunting presence that could be felt before it was seen. And now, with the disappearance of the hiker, the bear seemed more real than ever. Some said it was a protector of the land, punishing those who trespassed too far into the wilderness. Others believed it was a curse, a force tied to something ancient, something older than the land itself. No one could explain it, but the terror surrounding the creature had only grown with each new story, each new encounter. As the campfire flickered and the search party fell silent, their eyes turned toward the dark woods. The legend had spread, and now, more than ever, the forest felt alive with something otherworldly. Something that was watching. Something that would never stop. And as the night deepened, one thing was certain: the ghost bear wasn't a tale for children. It wasn't just a story told around campfires. It was real. And it would continue to haunt the woods, waiting for the next unwitting soul to wander too far. The legend of the ghost bear lived on, and its hunger was far from sated. The days passed, and the search for the missing hiker was officially called off. The forest, which had seemed so alive with the promise of discovery and adventure, now felt eerily quiet. The trees, once familiar companions to travelers, now stood like silent sentinels, guardians of some dark, ancient secret. The team departed, leaving behind the camp, the abandoned gear, and the unanswered questions. But though the hiker's disappearance was officially unresolved, the park had already started to change. Whispers of the ghost bear began to take root, first among the locals and then among the tourists who came and went through Yellowstone. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath, as though it too could feel the growing weight of the legend. Despite the absence of physical evidence, some claimed they could still hear the bears growl late at night, carried on the wind from deep within the forest. It was a low, deep sound, like the growl of an animal, if animals could growl in such a way. Others swore they saw glowing red eyes flickering in the shadows just beyond the tree line. It was enough to send a chill down the spine of anyone who dared to venture too far into the woods after dark. The stories spread quickly. Tourists who had heard the whispers back in the nearby towns began to share their own eerie experiences, strange shadows crossing their paths in the night, the feeling of being watched, of being hunted. And always, the growl echoing in the distance, but never too close. It was as if the bear was never far, always lingering just beyond the edges of their perception. Locals, long familiar with the park's darker myths, spoke in hushed tones about the curse of Yellowstone, of the spirits that roamed the land, of the things that lurked just out of sight. They knew the tale of the ghost bear all too well. Some believed the creature had been summoned long ago, a guardian spirit of the land, and that it had never truly left. Others spoke of it as a warning to those who came too close, a force that did not distinguish between friend and foe, only between the living and the dead. The myth continued to evolve with each retelling. Some said the bear could not be killed. Others said it only appeared when it was needed, when the forest needed protecting. There were those who claimed it was not just a bear, but a shape-shifting entity, a spirit of vengeance tied to the land itself. And still, the tourists came. They came for the beauty of Yellowstone, for the rugged wilderness, the hot springs, and the geysers. But some of them left with more than just photographs. They left with an unsettling sense of dread, with whispers in their ears of something far darker, something that walked just outside the boundaries of their understanding. The myth of the ghost bear had taken on a life of its own, and with each passing year, its grip on the park grew tighter. It was no longer just a story, it was an experience. It was something real. Something that lingered in the shadows of the forest, waiting for the next lost soul to stumble into its path. Something that would never truly leave, no matter how far people tried to run, no matter how many times they tried to rationalize it away. And so, the legend lived on, woven into the very fabric of the park, haunting those who dared to wander too deep, always there, always watching, just beyond the trees, just out of sight, but never truly gone. A new group of hikers arrived in Yellowstone, eager to explore the natural beauty of the park, as well as the legends that had taken root in its shadow. They had heard the stories, the ones that whispered of the ghost bear, and were determined to experience it for themselves. They spoke of it casually, laughing off the tales as nothing more than folklore. A bear that haunted the forest, glowing red eyes in the darkness? It sounded absurd, but it was the kind of challenge that seemed too thrilling to resist. For the first few days, the group marveled at the sweeping landscapes of Yellowstone. The bubbling hot springs, the towering pines, the soaring cliffs, it was a paradise for nature lovers. But as they ventured deeper into the wilderness, something started to shift. The air grew thick with a strange heaviness, and the deeper they went into the forest, the more they felt as though they were being watched. At first, it was just a feeling, a sense of being on edge, like someone or something was observing them from just out of sight. They tried to shake it off, rationalizing it as paranoia. But as the days went on, the oddities grew harder to ignore. One evening, as dusk began to settle over the trees, the group was hiking along a narrow trail when they heard the faint sound of footsteps behind them. No one was there. They stopped, looking around, but all they could see was the vast stretch of forest ahead, the shadows growing longer as the light began to fade. They resumed walking, trying to push the unnerving sound from their minds. But the steps were still there. Faint at first, but unmistakable. A slow, deliberate tread, like someone or something was following them. No one spoke of it aloud, but the unease was palpable. They quickened their pace, but the footsteps kept time with their own. That night, as they gathered around their campfire, the tension hung thick in the air. One of the hikers, a seasoned outdoorsman, suggested that they were simply hearing the sounds of other animals. But even he couldn't shake the growing sense of dread that had settled in his chest. The others began to exchange nervous glances, but no one dared to bring up the stories they had heard about the ghost bear. The next day, they continued their trek deeper into the park. The sounds of the forest, once comforting and familiar, now seemed off, too quiet at times, too loud at others. One hiker swore they saw something move between the trees, but when they turned to look, it was gone. Another felt a cold breeze sweep across them, despite the warm air of the summer afternoon. The whispers began, quiet at first, then louder as the night drew closer. Someone heard the growl. It was faint, distant, but unmistakable. A deep rumble from somewhere far beyond their camp. The hairs on the back of their necks stood on end, and though no one said it out loud, everyone knew what it was. The ghost bear. The same growl that the previous hiker had heard. The same feeling of being watched. The same eerie silence that followed. Panic began to creep into their hearts. But no one spoke of it. They didn't want to seem foolish, to admit that the legend was real. So they pushed the fear deep down and tried to ignore the creeping sense of dread. They moved on, walking faster, their eyes constantly darting to the edges of the trail. By the third night, the group was clearly unraveling. The shadows seemed to grow longer, and the forest seemed to press in closer, like it was alive, like it was closing on them. One by one, they heard the sounds, the growl, the footsteps, the shifting shadows in the corner of their vision. Still, no one dared to speak openly of their fears. The myth of the ghost bear had become too real, too close to reality, and they couldn't bring themselves to acknowledge it aloud. The terror spread silently among them, as palpable as the forest around them. Each of them knew deep down that something was watching, something was waiting. But no one spoke it aloud. Fear spread through their ranks, and the once confident group of adventurers had been reduced to something else entirely, an anxious, paranoid mass, moving as one, but fractured with fear. As the legend of the ghost bear continued to haunt the park, the hikers couldn't escape the inescapable truth that they too had become part of it. The park rangers had long been aware of the stories. They had heard the whispers of the ghost bear, of glowing red eyes that haunted the woods at night, of a presence that seemed to bend the laws of nature itself. But despite their years of service in the park, none of the rangers had ever encountered the creature, or at least, none that were willing to speak of it openly. They had their own theories, of course. Perhaps it was the power of the mind playing tricks, the isolation and fear twisting the perception of those who ventured too deep into the wilderness. The night was a powerful thing, after all. The forest could turn strange and unsettling in the absence of light, and the mind, left to its own devices, often conjured up the most terrifying things. But despite their rational explanations, the rangers couldn't help but wonder if there was more to the stories than mere superstition. They had learned over time to keep their distance from the tales, to keep the tourists calm, and to never speak of the legends unless asked. But when a new group of hikers came through, eager to challenge the myth and experience the park's mysteries firsthand, the rangers watched them closely. They knew what was coming, an adventure that could turn into something darker, something they couldn't explain. They kept an eye on the newcomers from a distance, their gazes sharp, knowing the forest well. And as expected, the hikers began to exhibit the signs of unease, the sudden glances over their shoulders, the unspoken tension that slowly crept into their conversations. The rangers saw them retreating inward, their group thinning as fear began to take hold. It wasn't long before the hikers disappeared into the woods, the echoes of their fear trailing behind them. And yet, despite all their years of monitoring, no one ever came back to tell the full story. Some said the hikers had gone too far, wandered too deep into the park. Others believed they had been swallowed by the wilderness itself, lost to the forest's vastness and unpredictability. But those who were left behind, the rangers, could never be sure. The stories of the ghost bear seemed to follow those who dared to search for it, growing stronger with each telling. It was as if the very nature of the legend had a power of its own, feeding off the fear of those who believed it, and growing more terrifying with every new whisper. The rangers would say nothing, of course. They couldn't afford to encourage the myth, nor could they risk sending anyone into the park with too much confidence in their own safety. But they would never forget the look in the eyes of those who came to the park with excitement and left with nothing but silence. They watched the park grow eerily still, its secrets hidden beneath layers of trees and shadows, and they knew deep down that the ghost bear was still out there, waiting for the next group of explorers foolish enough to test their fate. The legend endured, silently passed from one adventurer to another, spreading across the park like a dark whisper that never truly died. No one dared to speak of it aloud, yet everyone who ventured into those woods felt its weight. The terror was always present, lurking just beneath the surface of every tale, every conversation, and every quiet moment spent alone in the wilderness. And so, the ghost bear's legend lived on, more terrifying, more mythic, and more alive with every telling. The eerie truth of the legend began to settle over the park like an inescapable fog, an unspoken reality that few could comprehend. The ghost bear was not merely a story passed around the campfires and whispered among tourists. It was something more, something older. A living, breathing presence in the heart of Yellowstone, intertwined with the very land itself. It wasn't just a creature, no, it was a guardian, a protector. Its existence was a paradox, a force that existed to keep the balance of the park intact, to defend it from those who ventured too far, who sought more than they should have. The forest was its domain, and any who did not respect its sanctity, who wandered into the depths without understanding the rules, were met with its terrifying gaze. It wasn't just a bear, it was the embodiment of the park's wildness, its untamable spirit, and it would not allow the trespassers to remain. The protagonist, like so many before them, had crossed that invisible line. They had sought the thrill of the unknown, the rush of uncovering a mystery buried in the woods, but in doing so, they had sealed their own fate. The shadows that had pursued them, the red eyes that had burned through the darkness, were not there by coincidence. They were there because the park had chosen them. The ghost bear had seen them, marked them as an intruder, and from that moment on, there was no escaping its gaze. Now, the protagonist's fate rested in those same shadows, their story a part of the growing myth that clung to the park like a dark, suffocating mist. They had become a lost soul in the forest, just another tale for the park rangers to silently acknowledge, another face to haunt the corners of the hikers' minds. But the bear's watch never ended. It was always there, lurking in the depths of the woods, waiting for the next soul to wander too far, too deep into its domain. It was always watching, guarding the secrets of Yellowstone, ensuring that the balance of the wilderness was never disturbed. The forest remained still, the wind ever so slightly rustling the trees, as if the ghost bear itself were still present, even in the absence of its visible form. Its eyes, glowing red in the night, watched over the park forevermore, its presence a constant reminder to those who dared to test their limits. And so, the legend lived on, not just in stories, but in the very fabric of the park itself. The ghost bear would never fade, never be forgotten. Its watch would continue, and its story would be passed on from one person to the next, a chilling warning to all who dared to enter the woods uninvited. The creature, the guardian, the terror, was always waiting. Hope your dreams are filled with fear. Good night.